Hey, class. Um, I'm re-recording the uh, podcasts that aren't showing up on YouTube. YouTube says they're processing. Uh, I did double check the lecture before I posted it, and everything seemed okay. And I don't know if this processing business, I don't know what's going on. But if you know YouTube, if you know the new YouTube world, and you have some kind of clue as to what's going on, I'd really love it if you reached out to me. It would be a huge help. Okay, so here's the story. As I talked about in the first podcast, the Spaniards ignore Texas pretty much after de Vaca uh, meets up with his comrades in what's now Sinaloa, the state of Sinaloa in western Mexico. De Vaca was horrified by the fact that his comrades try to take the indigenous people he's with, tries to take them slaves. He goes back to Mexico City and then back to Madrid, and then he writes the account that I had you read. He actually goes back and he dies in South America in the 1560s. He had a very long and eventful life. So the Spanish, they ignore what's now Texas for two key reasons. Number one, there's no mineral wealth in this area. The Vaca had come back with some reports that there was mineral wealth in what's now Texas and what's now New Mexico and what's now Kansas. And so what the Spanish do is they send up an expedition under a nobleman by the name of Coronado into Arizona, into what's now the panhandle of Texas, all the way up into Kansas, looking for this mineral wealth. And if you're in the Navy and you were stationed at Coronado Air Station in San Diego, that's who the air station is named after. So Coronado comes up, and he's a very different kettle of fish than the Vaca. He's quite cruel to the native groups that he encounters, especially the Pueblo. He tortures them or some of the natives that he encounters. He's trying to get information on this wealth, and there's no wealth up here, and he thinks they're holding out on him. So what the Pueblo do is they say to him, "Oh yeah, there's mineral wealth. It's just further north of where we are. You just have to keep going." And basically, what the Pueblo are trying to do is just trying to get them out of his hair. And in fact, they actually assign a Pueblo goes with Coronado to get them away from the Pueblo, and takes them all the way up into the Kansas area. And at that point, Coronado executes him, and he goes back into Mexico, back to Mexico City, and he feels like his whole adventure in this area has been a dismal failure. So Coronado's significant. He's the first European to discover the Grand Canyon, for instance. He helps map this area of North America. His encounter with Texas is tangential. He just crosses through the Panhandle on his way to Kansas. This is also the first Spaniard sighting of the massive bison herds that roamed the central portion of North America. So Coronado can claim credit for that. But from his point of view, his whole expedition was a failure because he didn't find any mineral wealth in this area. Now, there is mineral wealth in what was Spanish possession. It's in California and Nevada, but that wouldn't be discovered until 1848, the 1800s. And we're way back in the 1500s. So there was mineral wealth, but it was much further west and north of what's now Texas. So after Coronado's expedition, which happened in the late 1530s, early 1540s, the Spanish basically ignore what we now call Texas. Now, the other aspect of why the Spanish ignored what we now call Texas is the Indians here, with the exception of the Caddoan peoples in East Texas, Western Louisiana, Southwestern Arkansas, were nomadic peoples like the Karankawa, who I talked about last week, and they were constantly on the move during the year, looking for places where they could easily gather food. And they just weren't good candidates for Christianization. Now, the Caddo were good candidates for Christianization because they were mostly an agricultural people that stayed in one place during the year, that were able to create fairly extensive villages. And so they were much better candidates for Christianization. Now, the thing to remember about the Caddoans, they still exist in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, but they're much diminished from their peak, which happened a couple of hundred years before the Spaniards arrived. But nonetheless, there are remnants of the Caddoan people in what's now East Texas, and they're good candidates for conversion to Catholicism, but it's just too far from Mexico City. East Texas, even today, by foot and by wagon, it's not a long trip by plane. It's actually surprisingly, it only takes about 2.5 hours or less to get to Mexico City from San Antonio anyway. But if you're traveling on foot or by wagon, it's a long way. So, long story short, the Spanish, it's just not worth their money and their time to try to settle Texas. And it cost a lot of money to settle these areas. So the Spanish, they focus on areas like Santa Fe, which is, there's a lot, Santa Fe was much more attractive to the Spaniards because it's on a major trail. And so Santa Fe is settled much earlier than any place in Texas is. But in Texas, the Spanish ignored Texas until the 1680s. Again, no mineral wealth up here, and the native groups, except for the Caddo people, are not good candidates for Christianization. So this is an example of history, what doesn't happen. If there'd been mineral wealth up here, the Spaniards would have settled this area. They would have built cities like Mexico City. There would have been a major Spanish presence in what's now Texas, as there was in Mexico and in Peru. But since there wasn't wealth, what you have is, by even as late as 1820, there's only about 3,000 Spaniards or people of Spanish blood in Texas. So the Spaniards do leave a permanent mark on Texas: the Spanish language, the Roman Catholic religion. Every major river in Texas has a Spanish name except for the Red River. San Antonio is a legacy of the Spanish period. The rodeo is a legacy of the Spanish period. Ranching is a legacy of the Spanish period. So the Spanish do leave their permanent mark on Texas, but at the same time, they don't populate Texas to any significant degree. And that's going to play a very significant role once the Spanish face rivals, especially once they face off against the United States beginning at about 1800. So two things are true. The Spanish leave a permanent mark on Texas, but they don't ever establish a significant population in Texas.